Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today, your morning, afternoon, evening, for the October edition of the Windows in the Cloud AMA. I am your host, Christian Montoya, and if you haven't joined us before, we are starting to talk about Azure Virtual Desktop. We know that we have so many of you customers out there. We want to keep you all informed. We want to highlight everything that's coming in. We're not forgetting about you. So what I have today is an awesome panel of Azure Virtual Desktop product owners along with me, and I want to let them introduce themselves before we get into today's Ask Me Anything or Ask Microsoft Anything. So Eric, actually, I'll start with you. I think you're a regular on this show, aren't you?
I'm a regular everywhere. Thanks, Christian. Eric Orman. I'm a PM lead on the Windows Cloud Experience team, which is the engineering team for both Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. I primarily focus on Azure Virtual Desktop.
And I'm Jason Parker. I'm the product owner for FSLogix and also working in the Windows Cloud Experience team, primarily focused on Azure Virtual Desktop. But as many of you know, FSLogix is a product that spans way more than just the cloud. But we're here to answer your questions about all the things that revolve in and around Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows in the Clouds, profiles, app attach. You bring it, we're here for you.
Absolutely. And my name's Jim Moyle. I came across to Microsoft through the acquisition of the FSLogix technology, where I used to be the chief technology evangelist. So anything that Jason can't answer, then, I'll give it a go. But it's very unlikely that's going to happen. So my area of responsibility is apps and image delivery. So anything app attach, anything session host update, anything to do with images and apps in Azure Virtual Desktop, then that's me. Do you want me to do the announcements now, Christian, or do you want to do it?
Yeah. So I think you seem to be the person of the hour. So before we get into your announcements, Jim, I do want to re-highlight to the audience the latest Gartner Magic Quadrant for Desktop as a Service. So Microsoft's honored to be recognized as the leader in the inaugural Gartner Magic Quadrant for the Desktop as a Service. And we're proud that Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop have been recognized pretty early on in their life cycles. And we hope it shows that we're committed to both these products for delivering solutions, empower your productivity wherever and whenever you work. So the link there is below. I wanted to highlight again, as this went out last month, but in case we didn't catch you last month, you're here now. So the link is ak.ms/W365 Gartner MQ blog. So check that out. It's a good read. And Jim, now back to you as the person of the hour. Which one do you want to start off with? You have two big things.
Just before we do that, I had somebody ask me what a Gartner Magic Quadrant was when I posted on Twitter about that. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, who wants to take the stab at it? Because you all probably know more about that stuff than I do.
Eric, go on. You do the Magic Quadrant stuff.
You're the Twitter.
Oh, okay, fine.
Fine. You answer the Twitter.
What is a Gartner Magic Quadrant? I'll do this in like 5 seconds. One axis is capability, and another is innovation. And if you qualify high in both of those, then you go into the top right-hand corner, and you are winning the Gartner game. And they try and take everybody in the industry. And this particular Magic Quadrant is for Desktop as a Service, and Microsoft is in the most top right, which is the best place you want to be. So that's what a Magic Quadrant is.
It's also the signal that any C-level looks at in terms of trying to get an understanding of which product represents the best in the industry. And so whether it's Desktop as a Service Magic Quadrant or security related, there's Magic Quadrants, there's a whole bunch of them, but they're mainly used to be able to identify what the industry top products are. There's descriptions that go with them. So it's a who's who of what the best products are out there from a very long-standing trusted source, Gartner.
Perfect. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Jim. To be fair,
No
I'm
worries.
probably one of those folks that like, oh, what is this thing that that we're asked to read? So yeah, now let's get back to you. You have two pretty cool private previews coming up that it would be great to share a bit more.
Yeah, and so I said that my two areas of responsibility were apps and image delivery. And I've got private previews running right now that you can sign up for today for both app delivery and image delivery. So let's take app delivery first. So for app delivery, we have a release product called MSIX App Attach. And we've taken a load of customer feedback on board. And we've actually spent the last few months completely re-architecting it from a back end and a capabilities point of view. So if you've tried it before, then it is vastly changed now. You want to get onto the private preview and you want to see the new capabilities. The same is true for image delivery. There has been a huge amount of excellent quality feedback from customers, partners, and the industry, MVPs, community, everything we try and take signals from, about improving the experience of delivering and updating images within Azure Virtual Desktop. So we have essentially a suite of features that are all coming out in private preview right now. And you can sign up for the session host update private preview as well today. It will take a couple of days for your subscription to get authorized and your email to get added onto the relevant Teams channel. But sign up for them both. Have a look at the new features just coming up.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm hoping that we get a couple more questions coming in today to explain, what the differences are. Like you mentioned with App Attach, you're mentioning that if you've used it, heard it before, then you definitely want to try the new stuff. And the session notes update with the images. So hopefully we'll get a couple more questions in and we can continue showing why we have new previews, why we're investing even more in each of these. And so, just the last private preview that you mentioned was the session host configuration update. That's ak.ms/session host/private preview. So let's see. I guess while we wait for some, here's the first question. Cool. We are new to AVD and are starting with configuring our first host pool in Azure, which is a pooled host pool with Windows 11 multi-session. The users are synced from an on-prem AD to Entra ID. The personas are pretty simple and just use M365 apps, FSLogix, and 2 business apps. We know from Intune that hybrid join for notebooks, I guess, probably laptops, isn't a good idea and gives us a lot more complexity. What is the best practice for AVD in our case? Should we configure hybrid Entra ID join or Entra hybrid join without having a DC in Azure, or is it required to have one in Azure to be able to configure GPOs? Or how do you manage a session host? Configuring Azure D domain services does give me also more complexity in this case, right? So, great question. What kind of domain join do you do for your session host?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab. I know that Eric has probably a lot more experience in this, but primarily when you're talking about hybrid, Entra hybrid join, which is the new terminology, you are relying upon that machine being dual joined to both your on-premises Active Directory and the Entra ID, and having a domain controller is going to make things a lot simpler from a communication standpoint, whether or not if you are still using GPOs for some things, but it's going to make that communication a lot simpler and easier to troubleshoot if you have a domain controller in Azure in close proximity to that VM. Whereas if you just are relying on on-premise connectivity, either via express route or a site-to-site VPN, those could have issues, and so you wouldn't want to be reliant upon that for any sort of authentication or things that may delay connectivity. So definitely recommend having a domain controller in Azure for that, or at least really, really well connected. But Intune Manage really is the way forward. That's really where we're leaning in on really bringing some of the the configuration policies and configuration management to the forefront from a cloud point of view. And you'll start seeing that as we move forward with Entra join machines and staying completely within the Azure framework. Intune management is going to be your place to be, and we're starting to put more and more feature sets into that product that enables all of your configuration policies, conditional access, scripts, app deployment, and so there are some nuances to that, and you'll see that next month when we do a technical takeoff talking about Windows 365 and AVD managed via Intune. We're going to talk a lot about what are the things that you get and that you don't get, and things you can look forward to.
So Jason, I wanted to also take a step back because I was looking at some of the requirements they mentioned for the M365 apps, a couple desktops, and then they also want to use FSLogix. And so my question was, do any of the join mechanisms, are any of those incompatible with FSLogix? Is there any best case for FSLogix between those?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Christian, because we do get a lot of customers that are in this forward-looking process of hey, I want to be all in on the cloud. And how do I do that? And most of the time, they're doing that through being completely all into cloud identity. With that being said, FSLogix in particular still has a pretty tight coupling with how we leverage identity, particularly in the volumes that we mount or the file shares in which your profiles get contained. We do rely on the Kerberos authentication and the Entra ID authentication with cloud-only identities. We have a few areas in which we can enable that, but it does introduce some complexity, and I've written a blog on it. And maybe when someone else is talking, I'll pull up the blog article that talks about the couple of different options. But for right now, your preferred and most recommended option is to stay Entra hybrid joined. That's going to give you the best experience on FSLogix and Intune management and all those things. Go for it, Jim.
Yeah, so the same is true for App Attach as well, right? Because effectively both FSLogix and App Attach are relying on SMB storage, which has a natural tie-in with a traditional Active Directory. Now, if you go to the private preview I asked you to sign up for, then we're going to have a look at enabling this without any connection to a traditional Active Directory and enabling Entra ID. Are we saying Entra ID or Entra ID?
I don't know. It's router. Router. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Yeah. There's about 8 different ways to say Azure. Azure. I don't know if it's going to be the same with Entra ID.
I think it's Entra. That sounds more sophisticated.
This seems like a requirement in order to choose new names. We have to make sure that there's more than one way to say it.
I think if anything, we as Microsoft are consistent in making sure that our names are difficult to pronounce all throughout history. So we're not alone with you guys out there in the field, customers using the products. We're also what do we call this thing? Hope we get it right.
But yeah, so for the time being, if you've got line of sight to a traditional AD controller, that's going to give you the easiest path. Now, down the line, people who want to do cloud only, we're going to enable that for all of the features of AVD, and it's going to be a super comfortable environment for you. But maybe if you're first starting out, that question is for somebody who's going from an on-prem, they're starting out, do hybrid when you're starting out. It's just going to make your life a bit easier.
Yeah, we're making, I'll second those comments. We're making great strides where you could Entra join your AVD host. So that's, formerly Azure AD join, now Entra join. We're making great strides. Just recently, Jason's been working really hard. The FSLogix agent is now in our gallery images that you can select when creating a host pool. And then also in Intune, both the AVD and FSLogix ADMX are available. So because when you Entra join your devices or Azure AD join, you don't have GPO in order to apply to that. So Intune is your management control plane that are applying those policies. And so now we have both FSLogix, AVD, and Intune have all the rest of the GPOs for Office and Windows. already available in their settings catalog. So we're making great strides to having a cloud-only scenario. And I'll be a little more blunt, just saying we've got a couple of gaps today when you're using cloud-only identities. And that terminology with everything gets really confusing. So just to kind of give an overview of that, when we say cloud-only, meaning your users are not synchronized from Active Directory to Entra or Azure AD, meaning you're using just a cloud identity that is in Entra ID. It's not synchronized. And so going back to what the recommendations that Jim and Jason said is make sure that when you're to the question that was asked, you're using synchronized users. Your hosts are hybrid joined, and hybrid joined is, well, why would you want to do that? There's a lot of reasons why. SSO is the main one. So you're going to single sign on. You're going to get your M365 apps are going to be able, if you use shared computer activation, they're going to be activated immediately. You're not going to have to authenticate and sign in credentials. It's immediate. Your hosts are also going to have access to all the other available capabilities within the cloud. So it's a holistic story, and you're probably already hybrid joining your existing physical PCs within your organization. So from a standpoint, there's a lot of consistency within that. And then Intune adds that management layer. Now you can also config manager, co-manage those endpoints also. That's not super popular because the config manager client is a little hungry monster sometimes and consumes the resources. But the Intune client is a little more efficient, I would say. So just thinking of how you want to manage that. I hope that provided a little more context and detail.
I think, yeah, because I think from all of you, actually, it seems like the recommendation is doing the Entra hybrid join plus starting to manage an Intune as much as you can. So basically either, do the session host provisioning or with Jim's private preview, do the session host update. But otherwise try to manage through Intune as much as possible, because at some point later, if you do want to switch to only Entra join and not have the hybrid deployment, then the same policies you create in Intune, you would just target the new devices as well, as opposed to having GPOs on-prem and having to migrate those later.
And some of you might traditionally not have a familiarity with Intune. You might be low or no skilled in it. Go talk to your desktop admins. They understand Intune. They understand config manager. They're also handling the identity more than likely on that. So don't try to silo and go at it alone, because Azure sometimes is a big, for the power and breadth that Azure is, it could be overwhelming initially. So you're going to have to upskill in some areas within Azure, but storage and understanding how to use that, Azure files, virtual networks, you're going to have to figure out if that's not already configured, creating a virtual network or a site-to-site of connecting your virtual network in Azure to your on-premise environment. Maybe that's set up, maybe that's not. You may have to upskill in networking a little bit. But if those have already been established, then go talk to those teams that already have it. You can peer one VNet with another one. So go and leverage the other people in your organization and their expertise. Don't try to go at it alone. That's going to significantly help you as you evaluate the product.
Yeah, I think from all the customer discussions we've had, there's always different teams that manage different components. So yeah, definitely coordinate. That'll make it easier for you to transition into Azure for your VNet solution. Okay, that was a great discussion. I love that.
Yeah, very good.
So for the next question, we have one from Sean. I think it's actually kind of related. How do we move completely away from the need for line of sight to the domain controller for FSLogix ACL assignment? Is this possible now? Will it be possible? Are there any workarounds available right now? So very, very related.
Yeah, great question. And I think the TLDR is it available now? No. Will it be available in the future? Yes. I think that we're all a little bit maybe caught off guard might be the wrong word, but like there's a lot of customers that are moving to this, again, cloud only, no dependency on a domain controller much sooner than we ever anticipated. And so there's a lot of things we're trying to play catch up on. Obviously, SMB file shares, do have a specific requirement on ACLs in order to be able to translate those ACLs from a domain controller in your native directory. And we're not really in a place now that supports a cloud-only identity scenario. We have some, again, I talked about, we have the FSLogix blog. So if you go to the FSLogix blog, which is aka.ms/FSLogix-blog, I do have an article out there that talks about how do you leverage cloud-only identities. And we do have a couple of scenarios which really rely on either computer authentication, which has some inherent risks, or you're using Azure Page Blobs as your storage endpoint, which doesn't really have the reliance on ACLs. But both of those come with either risk or complexity. But it is a huge priority for us. It is one of our top priorities that as customers, because we get asked all the time, we are getting into Azure, but we don't want domain controllers. We don't want the burden of managing these identities in multiple places. How do we do this? And so it is our focus to try and not only enable your profile shares to work with cloud-only identities, but also the other features of FSLogix, like application masking or application rule sets. Those are things where customers want to be able to assign those to cloud-only identities without the need to talk to a domain controller over LDAP or things like that. So it is a big priority for us. We're working on it, and hopefully we have stuff to share in the coming, the next half of next year.
I just want to give a little word of warning. If you're searching the internet and you're saying, how can I do this? And there are blogs that are knocking around that give workarounds to this. Almost all of those workarounds, either for app attachers, again, that's SMB storage, same as FSLogix, depend on having the storage key. Make sure that if you're going to implement that workaround and then you rotate the storage key, that nothing breaks. Because that can happen to you if you're implementing one of these workarounds that hasn't maybe been, somebody's been super kind and tried to help and put up a blog. But one of the problems I've seen is security comes along, they rotate the storage key, and all of your connections break. So all of your profiles break, all of your apps break. That's not a good position to be in. Make sure that if you rotate your keys, if you are putting in a workaround, that doesn't happen to you.
Additionally, storage account keys are not specific to folders or files or specific areas. It is the entirety of your storage account. And so that is, you want to make sure that it's well protected and that the right people only have access to that, and that you don't have a bad actor that comes along and can misuse that in a way that you don't expect.
Yeah, we could do like 15 minutes on why those
Sure,
are a bad idea.
Sure. That actually is another point, Jim, that I want to highlight, because one thing I want to highlight is a kind of key functionality of AVD that I want to make sure customers are using and testing is AVD, if that's the context of you using FSLogix, has the whole concept of validation environments, validation pools, where you can have essentially a mirror of what your production environment would look like, but to test various things, whether it's your own configuration with storage accounts, with FSLogix, etc., or whether it's new service features that are rolling out that we're just getting extra usage before we push it all the way to production. So please use validation pools. They're great for you. They're great for us to get feedback too. All around, it helps you and the overall product.
So I'm gonna disagree with you there.
You're gonna disagree with that. Oh, here we go. I'm ready.
So validation pools are great to test new stuff coming from Microsoft for services that we're going to update, and you want to say, okay, the new stuff's coming from Microsoft. Does it work in my environment? Validation pools are not good environments for you to test your own configurations. So you should have a separate test environment that is for your own environment that is separate from the validation pools, because then you know whether something has changed, whether it's down to a configuration change that you've made or a configuration change that we've made.
Right. So it's like limiting the variables, right? Is it a Microsoft thing that broke it, or is it my own configuration thing? So it's limiting down the variables. I see what you mean.
Now, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. When you do enable validation environment, because we do have that toggle, right? It is a switch. When you build a host pool,
Yep.
you can say validation environment. Am I right that the primary function of that is to deploy the latest and greatest RD agent to the session hosts that are part of that pool?
So it's not just the agent, but it's also the back end. So there are APIs that we will push to validation environments that we will not push into non-validation environments. So essentially, whether it's backend changes or whether it's agent changes, then that validation pool is where you can test the latest from the services, and there are tags where you can do UI changes. There'll be a PowerShell preview version, perhaps. All of that will tie in with your validation environment. We're not going to chuck anything at production without first chucking it at validation pools. So that means that if you have a validation host pool that mirrors, as Christian says, your production environment, where you've got some test users in there, and we are updating, we are making cool changes to the environment, you'll get pre-warning of that if you have a host pools in your validation environment. I would just say, if you've got stuff you're testing, stick them in a different host pool.
Mm-hmm.
I
It
like
sounds like
that.
it's the best of both worlds, right? So it's like you want to make sure that, obviously we're pushing new changes constantly, and we're developing new agents, new backend APIs, and you want to make sure that you're future proofing your environments to do that. So, in your environments, you may want to have like when you build your images and your deployments and your frameworks, that you're doing that outside of production into your pre-production or QA environment, dev test, whatever you want to call it, and then enable the validation flag, so that once that that's all well and good and tested, that you can start previewing some of the things that are coming out sooner, right? So it's kind of a best of both worlds, but you'll be measured in your approach on how to do that.
Yeah, so you don't have to set that flag at creation of a host pool. You can change it afterwards, which is super useful. So you can change that flag after creation. So yeah, you can do best of both if you're being more cost conscious in Azure, shall we say?
To your point, Jim, though, I do like your feedback, and I do think that's a good suggestion. Is if you're gonna run if you're gonna run your full production environment and you're gonna make changes, whether it's the Microsoft changes or your own changes, make sure you have a way to know if there's an issue, where it's coming from. So I like that.
And I think there's some things like app attach and FSLogix, because we've talked about a lot about that. Those are independent parts. They're not really part of that backend host pool architecture, at least for the time being, right? So FSLogix is a completely separate item to your environment, along with the storage that you're using. So even if you enable validation, it's not checking FSLogix as a validation point. It's not looking at your storage as a validation point. It's not doing all those things you may think like, oh, it's going to do these awesome super checks for me. We are thinking about that. So if you are wondering like, hey, how do I get this thing to be more, tell me all the things I should be do, we hear you, and we're working on those things.
Yeah, so currently app attach is a child of the host pool. So it will only apply to that host pool. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but if you sign up for the private preview, you will find out that effectively that is no longer true.
Where's that link again for the private
I know,
preview?
I'm making sure we have it. I'm making sure we have it so we can make Jim happy. Yeah, so yeah, the ak.ms/app-attach/private preview.
Fantastic.
And then just again, to make Jim super happy, here's the other sign up link for the session host update, the ak.ms/session host/private preview. So, all right, Jim.
You know how to
There we
make
go.
it
Got it all out. Okay. Let's see. There was another question here. Let me take it up.
While you're looking for that, what might be a topic to introduce is we did announce last month that we are retiring AVD Classic, or Azure Virtual Desktop Classic, and really our stance here is everything that you want AVD to be is in the ARM version of Azure Virtual Desktop. And some people may think like, oh, what's this classic thing versus ARM? Again, it's a Microsoft naming thing that we try and do all the time, which is provides a little bit of confusion in our names. But we are retiring Classic, which is you could only deploy that via PowerShell. and you create these tenants. And really, unless you're a multi-tenant hoster or you're hosting over 500 app groups and you have some crazy requirement, start working on migrating out of AVD Classic. Get to the ARM. We have an easy migration path, but you can check out the retirement page on AVD. I think it's aka.ms/AVD-classic-retirement.
Okay. Yeah, let's if we get that link, we can post it to folks here. But yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, the whole intent is to be built into Azure ARM objects. Yeah, we've virtual machines had a classic that went away. Virtual networks had classic that it's all about making sure we're all building on one Azure platform. So yeah, so that's not scary. It's just that old classic model.
Yeah,
so, thank you.
And you have 3 years to kind of get off of AVD Classic. The only thing we announced at the end of September was we're not allowing you to create new classic tenants. So again, this is old school terminology for those of you that maybe started with Windows Virtual Desktop before yet another rename. So you can't create tenants anymore. We do have an exception process. Again, all outlined in the article. But start making your way towards Azure Virtual Desktop using the ARM framework, and ARM is the Azure Resource Manager framework, and you'll be good to go.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So I did find the question in the next question.
Nice.
So from Steve, we have a strange issue with Windows 11 multi-session. The environment consists of 20H2 or 22H2, FSLogix, and Citrix. We build our images from code each time, so they're consistent, and it builds images for Windows 10 and 11, with just a few changes for Windows 11 specific items. And we use non-persistent machines. The issue we are having with Windows 11, which we do not see in Windows 10, is that if a user profile exists and a machine is freshly created, the first time a user logs in, their default built-in apps like Notepad, Paint, etc. are missing from apps and cannot even be searched. If they log on, log back in, then the apps show up. Any ideas to troubleshoot and fix this?
That's pretty interesting. We don't see a lot of this behavior. One, I would make sure that you do have the latest version of FSLogix. In December of 22, we released a version in which at sign out, we are recording all of the provisioned apps for the user. And we do that in a way so that when the user signs on, we can re-register those apps quickly for the user so that they are ready for when that user signs in, assuming that app is still on the machine, regardless of whatever version is currently running. So as long as you're on the latest version, we've seen a lot of success in that. And that's primarily for the Windows inbox apps. And when we talk about inbox apps, that just really means things that are native to Windows 10 and Windows 11. Nothing that's coming from the store. That's another priority for us from an FSLogix standpoint, is to really enable you to bring all of your store apps that your users are using and install those consistently. But nothing's really jumping out as something that you could do differently, except for making sure you're on the latest version. You can go through the logs, but I really encourage you to open up a support case. I know it's difficult for some customers, right? The challenging thing is that we as a product team, we have limited resources, and I can't spend all of my time scouring the internet on Stack Overflow or Reddit or some social media post to try and understand every nuance, and every customer's environment is different. Our best signals is through support. Support can be challenging. I know that right now we do have a pretty high volume count in support, but rest assured that I am reviewing cases on a regular basis. I'm watching how many cases are in the queue for FSLogix, and so definitely would say that's the best place to go. That way we can get a good look at your environment. And everyone's environment's a little bit different, so getting those nuances right is important in troubleshooting.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jason. A question from Anthony. If a user signs out of a host pool, is it normal for them to be logged out of Office 365 and OneDrive as well? my interpretation is if a user signs out of their session provided by the host pool, is it normal for them to be logged out of Office 365 and OneDrive as well?
I think there's some terminology here, right? So host pool is a logical container of all of your session hosts, right? So you're not really authenticated to the host pool, but from a session host standpoint, if you sign out of that session, it will not sign you out of all of your M365 apps across everywhere. That's a function that you would do from your browser or from account.microsoft.com, where you can say, hey, sign me out of all my devices everywhere. That's a different functionality than just signing off of a single session host.
Yeah, because that's kind of where I was leaning towards too. Is if the user creates their session, whether it's a desktop session, well, mostly a desktop session, and they sign out, then that's just like logging out of Windows from that VM that you are actually connecting to. So on that VM, you'd be logged out of Office and those, or M365 and those apps, because you logged out of Windows over there.
Now, I do want to call out, maybe Anthony, if you're still watching or you have this question, maybe if you want to repost, are you referring to, when your users sign into new session hosts, they have to re-authenticate to Office? If that's a thing, that is a known issue that we can talk about. And maybe we'll just talk about it now, right? So we have this concept of single sign-on. Single sign-on is really where we want people to be. And single sign-on is varied based on your organization's identity, authentication structure. Are you federated? Are you do you have different nuances to that? But really, single sign-on is about when you sign on to that session host, your credential or your logon is persisted into the session, and we can use that credential to then silently sign you in to OneDrive, M365 apps, Teams, all those things. If your specific environment is either Server 2019 or some identity configuration where when you sign in, those credentials are not your sign-on credential token is not persisted, that allows you to use it for those apps, and you're using FSLogix. In our latest version, actually in 2210 hotfix 1, we enabled this functionality called Roam Identity. And what this is the identity team had made this request, and they're moving forward in this idea that credentials and tokens that are stored on machines for purposes should never really be roamed from machine to machine, because if you're a bad actor and you can gain access to a machine, you can use those credentials in ways that are unsuspecting. And so the identity team is working on making sure that those things can only be used per machine, and so they don't want them roamed. And we took steps to ensure that specific parts of identity folders and tokens are not roamed with the user's profile. We just throw them away at sign out. But because we had so many customers that were in a variety of configurations from an identity standpoint, especially single sign-on, we brought this configuration setting in called Roam Identity, and you would want to turn that on, and that will allow those credentials to continue to be roamed. But the caveat here is that we want you to get to a place where you don't need that. You don't need to roam those things. You really want to rely on single sign-on and that logon credential to be used during the sign-in process. And to add even more complexity, if this wasn't already a complex topic, and I apologize for going on, but it's important we get this right. If you're using Intune management, you can't roam identity. The Intune enrollment is looking at the sign-in token, and it's using that as part of the device registration. And if that token is the same token from a different machine and you roam that to another machine, Intune sees that token and reads the wrong device ID, and then you start getting these bad registrations in Intune for your device enrollment. So it's a hard, complex topic. So hopefully that was where Anthony was going, but want to make sure customers get that right.
Yeah, single sign-on and all that stuff is very, very complex. So Jason, thank you for taking the time to tease that out. Okay, we have another question So from Rowan, when will FSLogix support installing store apps and then leaving them installed? I think you mentioned this earlier. If I install like Microsoft To Do app, for example, the next time the machine is rebooted or the user signs out the app, the app is removed and not reinstalled. The only way I can find around this is to download the AppX package and then use the dism exe online add provisioned AppX package.
So there's two answers for this. There's an FSLogix answer and there's an AppAttach answer.
Yeah.
Jason, why don't you go first for the FSLogix answer?
Okay.
And then I'll go after you.
So obviously the FSLogix answer here is for store apps, we are not currently handling those, right? We made a bunch of effort to ensure that the AppX packages that are built into Windows function correctly. Working with store apps, because there's, I don't know how many store apps are there, in the billions probably, right? Trying to get all those right and assuming that every vendor does those things correctly is very hard. It is our top priority during this semester and coming into this next version to have something that'll work with store apps. But I think the answer we really want to get to is, how do we make these applications available to users in the right way, right? And I think, I'll hand it over to Jim to talk about AppAttach and how we're making changes in that to make that the source.
So Christy, I see there's a question for Raymond, and I'm going to combine the answer to these two. So if you want to give us the Raymond question, and I'll combine the answers.
Okay. Yeah. So to combine it with the other one, Raymond's question was, how can we give a full desktop experience to users while making sure that only a few users can access specific applications? For example, 100 users have access to the remote desktop, but only 10 of them can launch Office from the start menu. And I guess there's other combinations there. This could be achieved with the FSLogix app masking rule, but we'd like to explore the capabilities of MSIX AppAttach to provide similar feature functionality.
So essentially, both of these questions from an AppAttach perspective revolve around making the apps per user and making sure that wherever a user logs onto, whatever machine in the pool they log onto, they get their unique set of applications. Now, with Win32 installed applications, Jason Parker mentioned this before, where you could use app masking. But if you're speaking about store apps, and you are, because Rowan said AppX package there, so that is definitely a store app. If it's a store app and it's in AppX package, you can use that for AppAttach, and that will follow your users, and that will be registered, guaranteed every single time, because we guarantee the registration of AppAttach apps every time they log on. And I've got a little screenshot of how you can tell. This is a good tip, actually. So if we can show that, share that screen. Let me see. Hopefully somebody's listening to me, and they will Samuel to share that screen.
Let's see if we get that going.
There we go. So Winget is a command line app that comes along with Windows. If you search the store, anything with an ID that starts with 9 is an MSIX app. Not a lot of people know that, but that's, even if you look on people's download things, that's an MSIX app if that ID starts with 9. And you can ask the vendors for that MSIX app. And then effectively, you can then use that as AppAttach. Now, that includes the Windows To Do app that we mentioned before, and it includes anything you're downloading for the store as long as it's MSIX. It's not just Microsoft. So, like, if you go to VLC, there's no download app. There's no download for an MSIX app from the VLC website. But you know there is one because it's got an ID that starts with a 9. So there's a lot more MSIX applications out there than people realize. And you kind of have to know this sort of secret tip that if you search the store and the ID starts with a 9, then that's definitely an app that you can use in AppAttach. So hopefully people who are listening can find that useful. And that's all I wanted to show on the screenshot there, was that little tip and trick.
Yeah, that's really great, Jim. I think that's a huge tip for people because while our goal is to get we want your applications to be attached via app attached. That way, it's per user. We can guarantee its usage. If you're not in that space, maybe you're in the process of converting Win32 apps into AppX packages, right? Be sure that you're checking out the guidance. Every vendor should be following the guidance on how to convert Win32 to a UWP or AppX package. That while you're not using App Attach, if you're converting it to AppX and you're registering it for your users, you're going to be wanting to make sure that those apps are packaged in a way that their directories and the file storage is stored in a place that's enabled for that the users are going to get consistent experience. We've had a couple of customers come to us with applications that have been packaged for AppX coming from Win32, and some of the data is stored in places that's not meant to be retained. And so when they sign out and sign into new machines, that data is not there. You want to make sure you're consistent, use App Attach. That's the way to go. You're going to get the best experience. But again, those are things to keep in mind.
Perfect. Yeah, Jim, I think at some point we'll need you to show us the dirty details of all the things with WinGet and apps and FSLogix things. So yeah, that was a cool tutorial. Hopefully folks watching, listening, learned there. As a quick note, unfortunately Eric had to drop, but fortunately he's also talking to customers. So he's going to continue learning more and answer their questions too. So the next question we have is from Volker. For individual terminal servers, that's a throwback. We set up a weekly virus scan on Sundays in order to subsequently detect viruses not detected with the real-time check. Now with the server farm and FSLogix, this is no longer the goal since the VHDXs of the users are not connected during the virus scan on Sundays, and the Outlook mailboxes and local docs of the users are also not connected. Is there a solution to be able to check the private data of the users by a virus search?
I think the easy answer is no, right? So while a user is not connected, the VHD container is self-contained. Right now, I believe trying to crack open that VHD and scan inside it is fraught with a couple of issues, right? You wouldn't want to invalidate the container. You wouldn't want to corrupt the container by doing something to it that then causes the profile to not mount. Your best bet is to rely on your heuristic or real-time scanning while the user is connected to kind of detect those things. But we don't offer at this time any way to scan those containers offline for malicious content.
So your real-time scan shouldn't be detecting anything less than an offline scan because you're checking against the same set of rules that you're doing offline, unless you've got them deliberately configured differently, which I wouldn't advise, right? And also, you don't want to be in a situation where you're configuring your permissions on profiles where somebody can go and crack open not only the VHD, but also maybe the OST file. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you're opening a security hole where somebody can go and read somebody else's mailbox, right? You want to make sure that those things follow the permission guidelines that we have in our docs and are locked down, and you don't want to try and work around to do this kind of thing because you're just exposing yourself to risk.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the comments was, or in the question was Outlook mailboxes, like you just talked about, Jim. If you're talking about OST files are extremely tricky. The Outlook team has designed that file specifically to safeguard the user's data. And if you do anything with that file, you will invalidate their cache and you'll force Outlook to essentially create a brand new one. So those are things that you'll end up with problems that you don't understand, and it's just because you've created a situation that maybe you didn't expect. So
yeah. So if you really want to improve your virus security, then make sure that your real-time scanning is following the same rules as your weekly virus scan, and then you won't need your weekly virus scan, and this won't matter.
Also, if you go to the FSLogix documentation at aka.ms/FSLogix, under our prerequisites, you'll find our antivirus exclusions. So if you're running an on-prem server, and you are scanning, those directories and file shares, you want to exclude some of those file types, because if you're scanning those while a user's trying to attach their disk, you're going to cause disk corruption or prevent them from mounting their profile. So, those are important things to keep in mind. Just little things that you want to do in advance, so you're not chasing problems that are unnecessary.
Sounds good. Let's see. So Jim, I feel like we haven't spent as much time on the session host update. Can you give some more information on kind of the value and benefits, and what customers would get out of it, as opposed to, I guess, what they would be doing today?
Yeah, sure thing. So effectively, there's a new type of host pool, which we're at the moment calling an automated host pool. When you create an automated host pool, everything that you put in to create that host pool is saved in a configuration file. It's not actually a file, but let's just say a configuration file, right? And when you want to then add more hosts to that host pool, you can say add 10, 20, 1,000. And you don't need to then re-add in all of your data, because this was a big source of problems, because people had to log into the Azure portal or do it live with PowerShell or whatever they had to do. They were creating hosts that were different from each other. And when you don't have a homogeneous host pool in terms of the bits, then that creates a bit of a support nightmare, because if you've got heterogeneous hosts in a pooled host pool, then you can have problems on one and not on another. You want your VMs to be as homogeneous as possible. So this helps you do that. So your configuration is then applied to the entire host pool. You can add VMs, you can take VMs away. But now you've got a configuration for your host pool. So what happens if you want to change that configuration? Maybe you want to update your image. Our new custom image builder feature just went GA. You've built a new custom image with your custom image builder. Monthly is what people usually do. Aligns with Patch Tuesday. We drop a new image. You build a new custom image. Now you need to roll that out to all of your users, and you need to roll it out in a good way. So now you go into your configuration. You say, well, actually, I want my image to be this new image from my shared image gallery. Azure Image Galleries is now called. And that will then push it out to your users. You can then either say, do it now, or schedule it. And you could even do it in rolling batches. So you could even do it without a maintenance window. Now, I wouldn't advise doing it without a maintenance window, sort of like, as a regular thing. But it's an extremely good thing to get you out of a hole. If you've pushed something out and it's not working for a good percentage of your users, and you need to roll it back without taking your entire environment down, then you can do a rolling upgrade to your previous version. Extremely useful. And because of this batch sizing, it means that, you can do it as fast or as slowly as you want. We'll do a test VM first, and there is some really cool stuff in terms of updating, configuring, and managing your session hosts around their images.
Yeah, I feel like it. I mean, even when I test and create my environments, it's always just remembering, like, putting the onus on the the admin to remember what they entered for every little thing. And now you're saying, well, the service can handle it. And because we have that, config, whatever, because we have that, we're making life easier for you. It sounds pretty. I like it. Sounds great.
So one of the things about trying to remember stuff, passwords. Nobody should be remembering passwords. That's rubbish. As part of the session host update and configuration, you can put your passwords in Key Vault. We'll integrate with Key Vault, and all you do is point to the secret in Key Vault. So you can have a nice complex password. You don't have to remember it. You don't have to input it. You don't have to keep it on a sticky note on your monitor. You can just stick it in Key Vault, and it's secure. And this is interesting, because it's in Key Vault. You remember I said we could schedule an update. That means that you don't have to have access to the Key Vault personally at all. The service itself has access to the key vault. So that means that you don't have to be logged into the portal. You don't have to kick anything off with PowerShell. You can say, please do that at 3 a.m. And because the service has got access to all the secrets, that means the service can then deploy and update all your images while you're asleep, totally hands-free.
That sounds great. It sounds like we're making things easier. That sounds pleasant. Sleep at 3 a.m., not work at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think that's a good overview. And so, if you have any more questions, I think we only have time for one more question here live. But for any other questions, let's continue following up in our feedback forums in future AMAs. We can get those answered. So for any future questions, go to ak.ms/community/avd where we do check. In the meantime,
one second, Christian. There's a super quick question.
I think
there's an appetite toolkit for Visual Studio.
I was getting there, Jim.
Hey, I thought you were going to wrap up.
Last question. Go for it, Jim.
Sorry, I just stamped on your fire there, Christian. I'm so sorry. And that was a very polite way of saying that. There's a different British colloquialism I could have used.
Go for the last question.
So I've read that there now is an appetite toolkit for Visual Studio. Where can I find prereqs? Yes, there is. This isn't from the AVD folks. This is a co-engineering project from the Visual Studio and the MSX folks. But you can now output app attached disks straight from Visual Studio. There is the link to find out about it and find out about the prereqs. Super. I told you it's going to be quick.
Yes. So that link is ak.ms/appattach from VS. So, all right, cool. I'm gonna usually like to end these with a little roundtable of what's your biggest tip or takeaway, and we already know Jim's 2 private previews. Got it. I think let's actually put those on the screen one last time just to make sure Jim is happy before he logs off for the day. So for the AppAttach private preview, that's ak.ms/appattach/private preview. And then for the session host configuration and update, that's ak.ms/session host/private preview. But Jim, do you want to say anything else? Is there anything else that I missed?
No, just you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can ask me anything you want. I'm usually fairly responsive on those platforms. You can look me up on GitHub, and I've got some sessions. Got some stuff on YouTube about image templates and automation and PowerShell. So find me on all of those platforms. It's easy to find. It's just Jim Moyle.
Well, you've been an awesome guest. And Jason, anything on your end? What should people do?
Yeah, again, I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can find me at MSFT Jason Parker. From an FSLogix standpoint, my biggest tip to customers out there is keep it simple. We strive on providing lots of options to make your deployments work, but go for the easy solution, right? The more complex you make it, the more problems you're going to have. We have great examples on our documentation. So always looking to engage with customers, whether it's on social media or directly. So
perfect. Again, you are also an awesome guest. And Eric, who had to leave early, great contributor as always. Glad to have you. Everyone that's listening, watching in, we do have one more Ask Microsoft Anything before the end of the year, and that's going to be next month. It's going to be, I believe it's Wednesday, November 20th or 22nd, I believe. So feel free to join us. Same time, same place, 8 a.m. Pacific, with the this AMA Windows in the Cloud channel. So we're excited to see you there. Everyone, have a great morning, afternoon, evening. See you later.
thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.